तनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। So that is a general prayer for which I explain the meaning. And before we start this Mandukya Upanishad, there is another prayer. So I will chant that prayer and I will explain to you the meaning before, because as I said, it's not in the tradition. It is taken as that when a jiva, when an individual gets to hear this truth, it is one of the biggest events in the life of a person, right? Because there is a complete turnaround, and the assumption that I'm this little tiny individual, right, with which we have lived not only one life but many lifetimes, but through cycles of creation, gets questioned and corrected. It is such a big thing that, and you need grace. You really need grace to continue with this pursuit and to see your own limitlessness, right? So this opportunity, it doesn't come, one cannot afford to have a small mind and understand this reality. One has to become bigger, one has to grow as an individual, and the whole equation of life has to change before one actually becomes eligible for this knowledge. So you pray, because you have to do every time one step further in your growth, right? It doesn't happen from this little individual to that, every one step that you make towards it leads you to another step and then another step, and until the time that this whole vision becomes as clear as daylight and it blesses you completely and it transforms you completely, right? So this prayer I will chant and then I will explain to you the meaning. It says, Om Bhadram Karnebhih Shrunuyama Devaah Bhadram Pashyemakshabhiryajatraah Sthirairangaih Sushtuvagam Sastanubhih Yashema Devahitayadayuhu Swasti na Indro Vriddashravah Swasti na Pusha Vishwavedah Swasti nastaksho Arishtanemihi Swasti no Brihaspatir Dadatu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. The literal meaning I will read out and then I will explain to you the meaning, right? So this is just to give you a very general idea, then I'll explain to you what it actually means. Here it says, O gods, may we always hear with our ears what is auspicious. O Yajatras, may we always see with our eyes what is auspicious. May we live with healthy limbs and bodies our full lifespan, praising the Devatas and doing good to please them. May Indra of great fame, the all-knowing and nourishing sun, Garuda, the one who knows no obstacles in his flight, and Brihaspati, the protector of our intellect, bless us with well-being and auspiciousness. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay. Now, the first sentence it says, oh my God, oh, that is so sweet. The first sentence it says, may we hear auspicious things, right? So, what does it really mean? As Surya said, I think in the morning class, and he says that the hearing takes place. I don't know if you remember, he says the bell is ringing and the hearing takes place. So you are not actually using your free will, it actually just happens. So if it just happens, why does the Upanishad say that may we hear all the auspicious things? Why? Because it's involuntary, right? It's not something that I decide, because whenever I am around something, I pick up sound. That is the nature of my ear. Okay? It does matter, because where you choose to be is your free will. Okay? And then what you hear may be involuntary, but when you choose to be, that's where you will hear what you will hear. Right? So that means that even though hearing is voluntary, you have made decision to be at a given place where you will hear, wherever you have chosen to be. So what is a natural tendency of a human being? Okay? A natural tendency of a human being is, you meet friends and you talk about many different things, and things which are actually after 2 days, if you ask what exactly was your conversation with this person, most of the time you won't even remember. You go to parties and you talk and you have no idea, and it has done nothing in your life. Okay? So that means so much time is wasted hearing things which are of absolutely no consequence to you at all. Okay? And even worse, sometimes when you get together, sometimes it's just because of lack of, topics to talk about or whatever, or at times it is just, what you feel, what is important to you or whatever. So much time goes in, let's say, gossiping. Okay? This gossiping is something which is like a human tendency where you almost revel in some kind of a difficulty that the other person is going through. That shows a very small mind. A small mind who actually takes pleasure in somebody's misery. One has to grow. One cannot afford to be this person, because if somebody's difficulties pleases you, it says a lot about the nature of your being. What is the problem? Why is it that at times that we feel almost this engaging, we don't want to know about people's lives, and we want to see what is really going on and all the suffering, and then it almost gives us some kind of a feeling of, there is some pleasure in engaging in that kind of a talk that happens. Why? That happens because everybody is suffering inside, right? And then when one sees that somebody else is suffering, it makes you feel, okay, I'm not the only one. Right? So that's what actually gives us satisfaction. That is that, okay, now somebody else is in the same boat. And therefore, hours and hours and hours are wasted in getting to know all these, there are parties which are wonderful. I don't need to say that one should not go to parties. That's not my message at all. You can do what you want, and it's good to go to parties. It's good to interact with human beings. I don't want you to think that, without that means you have to be a recluse and you have to cut yourself from the world and you have to be detached from the world. These are not at all the messages that Vedanta gives. Okay? But use every time that you have constructively. Right? Even in a party, you can actually engage in a conversation and get to know a lot about a lot of things. People are engaged in life and you can learn a lot. So it can be a learning mode rather than this wasting mode. Right? So this is what he says, let me hear what auspicious things. Let me use my free will to engage in conversations which are enhancing for myself and enhancing for others. And that initiative you have to take. Because there is a natural tendency of mind to just engage in superfluous things. But you can choose to do it differently. And how far you can go in this thing of hearing something which is auspicious. You can actually get to know the different people, their perspectives, different ideas. So that means you can keep on moving from this totally useless talks to something which is self-enhancing at a very different, in a progression, different levels of self-enhancement. Okay? What is the farthest that you can go in hearing which is auspicious? The hearing which is the most auspicious for you is to know that you are the whole. You can't get anything, you can't improve a statement that you are limitless. Okay? Limitless means that there is no boundary. Okay? So that is the most auspicious that is ever possible. And that is what Vedanta is saying, right? Don't disregard Vedanta as something which is not connected to life. Because my life is so lived as such a small human being with all my little problems and all. And almost I just retaining that little individuality, I want to solve everything. It's impossible. You have to, like yesterday Preeti was using this word, paradigm shift. You have to grow to see the world totally differently. Because otherwise it's like a frog in a well, staying in the well. He thinks that the universe is the well and he wants to solve all the problems within this well, which itself is such a small little place and the universe is way large. The frog has to come out. If he wants to know the universe, it has to come out of his defined universe, which is a well, and see the real universe. And put one's life in perspective within that. Okay? So this is where you have to have a paradigm shift. And the biggest learning that you can have, the ears can hear, is the truth about yourself. Because if that limitlessness was just kind of a imagination, then again it is destructive. Imagine you are limited and you are imagining that you are limitless. That is like a, for a psychologist, it is the greatest delusion. Right? Because you are imagining things which are not true. That's why the website is knowing the realities, being alive to realities. The whole approach is, if this is reality about myself, which is much more than what I have settled for, then what choice do I have but to give up my little notion so that I can see myself in a true light. And let me hear that knowledge which will make me see myself in a true light. That is the highest I can go. Okay? Bhadram karne bihi shunyam. Okay? Bhadram pashyet. Bhadram pashyet means let me see what? See things which are auspicious. What does it mean, see things which are auspicious? Vedanta is not saying that you reprogram yourself and see everybody is wonderful. Not at all. Lord Krishna did make a distinction between Arjuna and Duryodhana. It's not like, oh, everything is one, so everybody is the same. That is some kind of an illusion. It doesn't exist. This is not reality. Reality means that I'm objective to what is. There are differences at empirical level. I can't negate those differences. And I have to interact with those differences. But not what? Adding my own color. Okay? So that means seeing things auspicious means I remove what? My own coloring. And I begin to see things as they are. How far can my coloring not coloring go? In Vedanta, we will see, okay, that there are two types of coloring. One coloring is that I mistake a rope for a snake. Okay? I'm in a forest. There is lack of light, and I see an object which is kind of long, right, and then thin, and then with all these trees and everything, then I think that it is a snake, and then I have fear of snake. Okay? So therefore, what does then objectivity mean? That from the snake, where do I take? What do I see now? Rope, exactly, right? So that means I'm seeing auspicious. Auspicious does not mean that I see a beautiful, a gold chain instead of rope. Please understand what we mean by auspicious. Seeing things as they are. Otherwise, you go from one imagination to the other imagination. You're never in touch with reality. You go from a snake to a golden chain. Both are equally your imagination. One is what you call negative thinking, the other one is what you call positive thinking. You are never in touch with reality. Okay? So that means the objectivity means that you, from the snake, you shift to rope. Okay? So that is what you say, that let me see auspicious. See auspicious means see what is. Only when I see what is, I can assess accurately what needs to be done. Because if I go into this chain mode, then I'll be equally on an imaginary mode. And I'll not respond as it is necessary. Okay? So, from snake to rope is one amount of seeing accurately. But imagine, according to the Upanishads, all that is here is Om. So that means when I see a rope, and if my objectivity ends only there, I'm not still seeing the absolute. So that means now the most auspicious, the highest I can go in seeing the reality accurately is not just ending at the rope, but what? Seeing all that is here is Om. That means I'm stretching my hearing to the highest, I'm stretching my seeing to the highest possible thing. Okay? So this is what, let me be ready for this. Okay? So Bhadram Pashyemat, and in order to do this inquiry of seeing things accurately and to hear things accurately, you need healthy body and you need healthy mind. Give me that. Because no matter how much you are interested, if your body is aching all the time, you are sitting in Vedanta class and your attention will always be on your back or on your shoulder. Our teacher used to always make fun. He says, if there is a yoga student in the class, the whole class goes in fixing the posture, in putting the back here and breathing, and the person is sitting in the class, but the mind is acting totally in something that's so conscious of the body and wanting that body to be in a perfect posture and whatever, right? So that means you've lost all your opportunity to learn. So you need a healthy body, but you need a healthy body not to be centered on your focus cannot be on the body and perfecting the body posture. Your focus is on understanding what Vedanta is talking about. Or imagine that emotionally you're upset. You're sitting in Vedanta class, but your mind is constantly running the tapes of what happened with my this one and what happened with my that one, and all. In fact, it's amazing because during the 3.5 years, all your past memories, everything starts coming up. And you're sitting there, you really want to learn, but your mind is just not available. So this is where you ask for healthy limbs, including the mind, so that you can spend this time that is given to you really trying to understand what this vision is talking about. Okay? So this is what you pray for. And in order to, and the other thing is, which is very beautiful, that let me have a full lifespan. What does this mean? Let me have a full lifespan. According to our Shastra, everybody comes with what we call Prarabdha Karma. Prarabdha Karma means among all the different karmas that you have, there is a set which gives you this physical body, this given mind, and this given parentage situation that you go through or whatever. So that is something which is almost like your life path, life journey. Okay? But it's not totally predetermined. Please understand that, right? Because the situations occur and you always have a free will, right, with which you respond to those situations. So when you use your free will, you change the course of your life, because the actions that you have taken today will influence your future, and the actions of the past influence your present. It's a continuum. Okay? So when we talk about the so-called Prarabdha Karma, we don't talk about something which is totally fixed, unchangeable, something that you have to go through. That is a very, very, non-proactive way of looking at life. Okay? One has to. Human being means you have to act, and your action can be better than what it was 5 days ago or 1 minute ago, from a better understanding. Okay? And you have to equip your buddhi with certain wisdom so that you can act better. Okay? So this is what he says, that when you live your Prarabdha Karma, if there are, so that means Prarabdha Karma that you are born with will give you a certain lifespan, along with the body and with the mind and a certain situation. Also what is more or less decided is your lifespan. Okay. Now what happens is, at times people don't live that full lifespan. Why? Because you abuse the body. When you take to drugs, when you take to alcohol, when you take to tobacco smoking, and you take to all kinds of abusive products, then you are inflicting slow pain on yourself. And that means you are using the free will, right, to make the body not capable of living its full lifespan. You are intervening with the nature, but what? In a non-enhancing way. So they say, let me be responsible, let me not abuse my body and my mind either. So that means that if events keep on running in our mind endlessly, and I'm never free from the pressure of those events, I'm almost abusing myself, because you keep on running the same tape and you keep on being, no matter whether you go from Bombay to Himalaya to South India or to Canada or to USA, you go with your own mind. Okay? And you have this, what we call internal tape. And that internal tape keeps running. Okay? That means it is almost, it tantamounts to self-abuse. Because you need to find a way to free yourself from all these burdens that you are carrying. Because if you don't help yourself and free yourself, it will keep on running. Okay? So here, but for that, at times you are helpless, you are asking for help. Prayer, don't think a prayer is just some some insignificant thing. It's an extremely powerful tool that you have to ask for help in changing yourself. Okay, so
prarabdha karma then is not being the addict is prarabdha karma of that person.
I will explain how the whole karma works. That I will explain a little bit later. But what happens is that you come with this a given set of karma, and you need a body to go through those situations. But if the body is not capable of going through those situations, the body has to die before those karmas have ended. So this is what you call my full lifespan is that I have not abused the body, that it will stop to function before I have actually gone through all the karmas that I have experienced. Because in order to experience situations, you need a body, right? At some point what can happen is the body is just not capable of experiencing, so it has to drop. Okay, so this is what he says, let me live. A full lifespan, then it means that let me live meaningfully, right, so that I can complete this pursuit, right? And in order to complete this pursuit, I have to make sure that I take care of my body and brain, because otherwise, it's a waste. So, and for that, I need blessings. From whom do I need blessings? From Indra. Indra is considered to be, you have these entities in the universe. And one of the entities which is a significant entity is Indra. Indra is supposed to be the god, he is the king of all the gods. Right? So you ask for his blessing so that this pursuit of your knowing the most auspicious and your hearing the most auspicious can take place. And you're taking yourself, taking care of yourself and preparing yourself for hearing this can also take place without any obstruction. Okay. And then he says that there is he needs, or you need grace from, here what is interesting is Garuda. What is this Garuda? Why all of a sudden this eagle? Right? Why do you need a blessing from eagle? Okay. So the eagle is the one who looks at the target from very far away. Right? And then he goes and he's single pointed, okay? And no obstruction can actually stop him. Okay? He goes and until he gets what he sees from very far away, there is no stopping back for that Garuda. Just as Garuda is like, you ask for his blessing to be like that with reference to your pursuit of moksha. First, see the value of moksha in your life. Then, obstacles will come. It's not that, but you have to make time, you have to make effort, you have to do and go, and until the time that you discover this truth, don't stop. Because mind is also fanciful. Sometimes it can get attracted to something else, something that, oh, now you'll have some beautiful bliss experience, and you said, wow, that will be wonderful to have this bliss experience, so let's go there. Okay? So that means you haven't even thought about anything that comes, oh, that's interesting, let's go there, then let's go here, then let's go there, right? So you keep on going and you keep on searching without getting really anywhere in life. Okay. So first you need to identify what is it that you are looking for and what you need to get to fulfill what you are looking for. The logic that we have given is that if you are basically a limited person, you are a limited person. No addition is going to help you. The only solution to your problem is that you are free from limitation. So that means once you understand the nature of moksha, then in that so-called spiritual marketplace, where there are so many different possibilities, you have identified, then your life gains a certain direction. What is the nature of problem and what is the nature of solution? Because anything that you want to solve, you need to first identify what is the nature of problem. Otherwise, you're just in dark, you're just shooting in dark. And having determined what is the nature of problem, you then have to constructively apply yourself and say, okay, if this is the nature of problem, then what could be the solution? Okay. So this is where this Garuda is able to do it from very far away and then what? Go towards it. And this is why you want, just as you can do it, let me also be able to go towards this pursuit till I reach the end. Okay? And then he says Bruhaspati. Bruhaspati is king of all the intellects. Now, Vedanta, this is another thing which is a very dangerous thing. There is a very, at times, in the so-called spiritual world, there is a message. The message is given that, in spirituality, your intellect doesn't work. Because your rational mind is not needed in this kind of, because it's something beyond. My God. If somebody tells you to put your intellect away, right, that means the person just has total hold over you, because the only thing that you have to assess whether somebody is reasonable or not, you are blessed with your intellect. The only thing that can save you in life is your intellect. You need a discriminative capacity, because if you put it aside, somebody can take you for a ride. And you will just say, no, but I think like it, but no, but my teacher, this is how people are brainwashed into doing crazy things. Okay? Spirituality does not mean that you don't use your intellect. Spirituality means you use it, you use your discriminative capacity to the highest possible degree, so you can achieve something which is otherwise not possible. Okay? So this is where I ask for blessing. Let my intellect make it sharper and sharper and sharper. You ask for clarity. There is a prayer. Surya will explain this beautiful prayer of Gayatri Mantra. Gayatri Mantra is generally taken by a little boy and girls of 10, 11 years old. And they look at the sun and they ask for clarity of thinking. So you ask for blessings so that your intellect becomes sharp enough to see the reality, which is subtle in nature. Okay? So with this prayer, now the teaching begins. Now, this Upanishad is Mandukya Upanishad, and the Upanishad is organized in a way that there are 12, it's a very short Upanishad. It has only 12 verses. Okay. In those 12 verses, the entire vision of Vedanta is explained. But because it is so profound, then there is a person called Gaudapada. He is a very big teacher in the tradition, right? He is the teacher of Adi Shankaracharya.
Teacher of the teacher.
A teacher of the teacher of Adi Shankaracharya, the greatest scholar. And he has written what we call Karika. Karika to this Upanishads, where in fact there are 4 chapters of Gaudapada Karika. One is Agama Prakarana, which is where he has at times commented on the verses of the Upanishad and said what it means. Okay. After having done that, he has written 3 more chapters Okay, on in his words about what the Upanishad is talking about. Okay, so there is a second chapter of Gaudapada Karika, which is what we call Vaitatya Prakaranam. Vaitatya Prakaranam is the one which shows, highlights what we call Mithyatvam of this Jagat. Okay? Mithya itself, I will explain to you, all this will come, right? Mithya just, it means that it's something which has a dependent reality. So we will look into what has a dependent reality and all that will be discussed, right? So that means the whole thing is, anything that you see here has a dependent reality. Okay? So you think, what is the problem? We think that what we see here is absolutely real. What is being said is what you see. I'm not saying that it is not real, but it has that dependent reality. Okay? So it is shifting your vision that you will see. So that is the second chapter. The third chapter is, if everything that you see here is mithya, it has a dependent reality, then the question is, it depends upon what? Ultimately. Logically, if everything has a dependent reality, it has to depend upon something. Okay? So what is that one thing upon which everything else depends is the third chapter, which is Advaita Prakarana. Okay? And the fourth chapter is Alata Shanti Prakarana. Alata Shanti Prakarana is, in this Prakaranam, Adi Shankaracharya, in his commentaries, and also Gaudapada, he looks at, different existing philosophies of those times. People were looking at the Veda and they were coming up with different ideas of what was written in Vedanta. What is the vision of Vedanta? They have different ideas. So there are schools of philosophy, which is what we call Sankhya, Vaisheshika. So they are looking at the same text, but they have a different idea of what it says. Okay. So where Gaudapada as well as Adi Shankaracharya, they examine those philosophies and they tell you that where is the flaw, logically showing that here, if you take it like this, this is where the logical flaw will happen. Because the whole premise is that if there is a truth, then it cannot be contradicted by logic. Otherwise, you will accept things which are illogical as realities. Okay? So in this whole pursuit, you may not be able to arrive at the truth by logic, but if it is the truth, you also cannot contradict it by logic. Okay? So you engage in a dialogue with people who think differently by discussing, right? And the whole rule is the person who is not negated logically wins. And this is what happened in the lifetime of Adi Shankaracharya. He engaged in the discussions with Buddhists, with many different scholars, and there were dialogues which went on for days because they were all scholars. They were not ordinary human beings just thinking about something, right? And in each of those arguments, Adi Shankaracharya won. Brilliant. He made them see where if you take it like this, then this is where you cannot hold the vision. Okay. So in that Alata Shanti Prakaranam, he takes many different existing opponents who are looking at the Vedas and coming up with a different vision. He logically refutes them. Right? And he also takes this different schools of Buddhism, okay, and he negates what they are saying. And because there was a huge dialogue, okay, between, at that given point in time, when Adi Shankaracharya existed, almost 80% of India was Buddhist. Okay, because Ashoka converted into Buddhism, okay, and then there was, when a king becomes one thing, then it has a huge influence. So 80% of India was Buddhist. Okay. And he came and he was a scholar, and then there were dialogues, and all the Buddhist scholars were actually defeated by him. Okay. And it's not, as I said, it has got nothing to do with a person. Like Einstein, what I said, he praised Newton like anything, but then he says, I don't agree with your idea. Because the ideas are not, the owners of ideas are, ideas are in keeping with the validity of the idea is not dependent upon from whom it comes. The validity of idea depends upon how accurately it describes the reality. So therefore, he engaged in the argument. So here we will see all of that. Okay? We will examine. It is nothing to do with, that we are against them or anything. Just logically seeing that if this is the reality, if you construe something else, it falls apart somewhere logically. So the Alata Shanti Prakaranam is the one where once he has told you what exactly Upanishads are talking about, he examines different schools and he negates them. So we'll see a glimpse of that also. So this is what we call the really learning of Vedanta Shastra with a certain advanced way of looking at this, right? So we will not worry about that right now. We will start with the Upanishad, right? And we will start with the first verse of the Upanishad. It says, Om iti etat aksharam idam sarvam tasya upakhyanam bhutam bhavat bhavishyat iti sarvam omkara eva yaccha anyat trikalatitam tat api omkara eva. Okay. So here he says, Om, the word is all this. The whole universe, a clear explanation of this, okay, is started with. Okay. All that is in the past, in the present and the future is indeed Om, and whatever else there is beyond the threefold periods of time, that is also Om. Now, oh my God, that is a huge statement. Okay, so you need to understand what it means. What you see here, you see mountains, you see trees, you see human beings, you see insects, you see animals, you see... I don't see Om anywhere. Where is Om? What is Om? What is Om is what we call the cause of the universe. The cause of the universe is all that is here. How, if the cause of the universe is all that is here, why don't I see that cause of the universe? Why do I see forms? So this is where that seeing has to be refined, right? What meets my eyes is one thing, but when I inquire into the reality of something, I see something totally different. Okay. So this is where this whole teaching starts with this world that we see is not something which is an illusion, right? The trees are trees, and the water is water, and the mountains are mountains. We are not talking about them being subjective realities. It's not like a snake or anything that I'm imagining. It's there. Okay? But because it is there, I have taken it as what? The absolute reality. Now, that is my conclusion. That because I see it, it is absolutely real. So there, the Upanishads are saying that because you see it, I'm not denying it. There is a form, I'm not denying it. But because you see it, it's a final reality is your conclusion. Let's relook at it. Okay. So therefore, we have a term, and in order to re-look at it, you have a term which is what we call Satyam and Mithya. Okay. Mithya is that which has a dependent reality, and Satyam is that which has an independent reality. So if I ask you, what is this? Okay, now I'll ask you, what is this? Follow change. Something more. Sari, right? So Uddhav says this is a sari, and I say that it is a fabric. Okay, who's more right? Both are right, because both have a, it's true. I mean, you can't deny that it's a sari. It's not a shirt, right? It's a sari. Okay? But at the same time, right, then sari, if we both were equally right, sari and fabric would be synonyms. But sari and fabric are not synonyms, so that means one of us has to be more right than the other. Who's more right? Huh? I am, yeah, the teacher.
Of course.
Okay, because if Uddhav says this is sari, and if I say it's a fabric, I will tell Uddhav, okay, I will take the fabric, you keep the sari. If I take away the fabric, what will Uddhav be left with as a sari? Nothing. Right? So that means we are not saying that this sari is mithya. I mean that it is not there. It is there, but it entirely depends upon fabric for its existence. Okay? So before I thought sari was the reality. Now I say it is empirically true, but it is not absolutely real. Because without fabric there is no sari. Okay? And while the sari is all this, the fabric, does it actually take on the attribute of the sari? Never takes on the attribute of a sari. Fabric is a fabric. Okay? You can actually, once I use this fabric, right, and I can make a dress, it ceases to be a sari. I can use the fabric and it becomes a dress. While being in the form of a sari, it has never taken on the attribute of a sari. Please understand that. Okay. So therefore, now I understand sari is mithya. Then the fabric is, now I think fabric is satya. Is fabric satya? The fabric itself has a dependent reality. What does it depend upon?
Thread.
Huh? Cloth. Thread, exactly. The thread can be a silk thread, or it can be a cotton thread, or it can be a synthetic, So that means that the fabric itself, because again, from this fabric, if I take out all the threads, what will be left of a fabric?
Threads.
So that means here you have three names. You have one object and you have three names. Sari, fabric, threads. Okay. Each one is right here. Please don't think it's somewhere else. Where there is sari, that's exactly where there is fabric. Where there is fabric, that's exactly where there are threads. Okay? And the threads themselves is it independent reality or a dependent reality? Dependent reality. What does it depend upon? Cotton, exactly. Right? Silk, it's a verb, my God. And if it is cotton, then there is this cotton. Okay? So the thread itself depends upon cotton for its existence. So again, where there is thread, there is cotton. Mithya. Mithya within mithya, within mithya, within mithya.
And what is reality?
Exactly. And you can go on. And you can go on, and what is interesting is the discoveries of modern science has helped Vedanta. Quantum physics has helped Vedanta tremendously. Because we have been talking about world being mithya for a very long time, and we are using examples of cloth and pot and clay and stuff like that. Now you can use quantum physics and say that even that cotton is nothing but atoms. Atoms are nothing but particles. So that means there is a dependent reality all the way. You have increased what? Your knowledge of the chain of dependency. Okay. But each one is as mithya as the other one. Okay? So you have all these mithya within mithya. There is no one thing called mithya. Please understand that. And then ultimately, as Savita is asking, what is the final reality upon which everything else depends? Okay? And this is what? This is the question that science is grappling with. They don't know. They don't know because after particles they think about quarks, but all of that becomes just an abstract, right? There are no objects anymore. It all just is then mathematics, concepts. Even at a level of particle, okay, there is no real object called particle. The quantum physics actually, it was amazing that the one thing which it will act as a particle when you want to measure the mass. Okay? And if you want to measure the speed, it will behave like a wave. So that means the observer's intention will decide what it is. It is not independent of the observer. So there are no objects which are really something which are there. Okay. So therefore, the thing is that up to now, and what science can do is look for another object, which is again going to be what? A longer chain of mithya. You prolong the chain of mithya. Okay? But the very assumption that one object is the building block of the universe is not true. So this is where Vedanta walks in. He says, you will never find the building block of the universe as a given object, because what is the building block of the universe is Om. Om. What is Om? Okay. When all these, as Uddhav says, that they are just concepts, okay, and they are something which are like even non-tangible, okay, they are not really kind of tangible specific things, okay. So then what brings about these tiniest objects and arranges them is what we call the all-knowledge. Okay. From this all-knowledge comes these tiniest particles, okay, and those particles are arranged in a way that sometimes what? It becomes mountains, sometimes it becomes trees, sometimes it becomes the sun, sometimes it becomes the moon, the planets, the galaxies, human beings, animals, insects, amoebas, bacteria, rocks, everything. All that is here is that intelligence from which everything else comes about. So wherever you see forms, I see my body is a form. Where there is this body, there are those cells, billions of cells, which are working in harmony so that I can look at you, I can hear the sounds which are outside, my digestive system is going on and digesting all the morning food that I've had for breakfast. My respiratory system is doing its job of getting the air and nourishing my body, and my circulatory system is in function. Thousands, billions of cells are all coordinating. Am I telling them now you go here and you go there and you do this and you do that? I don't even know what's going on. But these billions of cells are coordinating it perfectly so that it can happen at every time. So that is that intelligence which is present here and now. That intelligence is making my cells what they are and organize them in a way that my body functions. There is the same intelligence is what making your body what it is, and your cells organizes your cells. The same intelligence is making what the trees are what they are.
That's a question.
Yeah.
The threads of the cloth don't organize themselves on their own.
Exactly.
A person does it. So, in case of the universe,
Yes.
so
So-
how does
So you need an all-intelligence. This is what we call Ishvara.
okay, so there's a
So
third-
that's why the term Om means Ishvara. Ishvara means all knowledge. What does Ishvara mean? Ishvara, generally when we think of Ishvara, exactly, the things don't come and just organize themselves. So this is what we are saying, there is an intelligence which organizes them, and that intelligence, we give it a name, Ishvara, Om. And that intelligence is everywhere. Okay? Generally when we think about Ishvara, we think that it is an entity which is other than us. We think that there is this Ishvara and we almost look up to the skies as though he is somewhere hidden in the skies. Okay? And we think that we are this little individual which is totally separate from him, and we just are at his mercy, right? And we ask, because he is this all knowledge and all power, and I'm so insignificant, and I feel that I'm totally helpless, and I think that, he will be benevolent towards me. We forget to see that if there is something which is all knowledge, it cannot be separate from me. Why? Because logically, Ishvara cannot be all knowledge if my little knowledge is separate from him. One thing is very big, the other thing is very small. That very small, if it is separate from the big, what? That thing you can't call it all knowledge, because my knowledge is separate from his knowledge. So that means he is limited by his knowledge, because his knowledge, his knowledge he has to minus my knowledge. Then in his knowledge you have to minus your knowledge and your knowledge and your knowledge. You will be left with very little knowledge. That means all knowledge is all-pervading. This is what we call Ishvara. That Om is present here and now, making everything work, but in your vision, it is totally missed out. Because in your vision, you see mountains, rivers, and you take them as absolutely real, and you transact with the world as though it is all totally real. So this is the shift of the vision that Upanishad is talking about. The objectivity means seeing things as they are. If all that is here is one all knowledge which is manifesting in many different names and forms through series of arrangement. Series of arrangement means initially bringing about this tiniest and the minutest of the things called particles, then organizing them to make atoms, then organizing those atoms in different permutations and combinations to make different objects, and each object is again what? Further organized. The clay comes. Now the clay is further organized to become a pot or any different form of the pot, of the clay that you can think of. All the way, don't think that the all knowledge is right below. All knowledge is all the way. The fabric becomes fabric because there is a presence of all knowledge. From the fabric, a human mind intervenes and makes many different clothes. The neurons that are ticking, which is making human mind conceive different forms of fabric, is again governed by all knowledge. And one uses one's endless creativity to keep on making new forms of fabric. Presence of all knowledge. Everywhere. At no point in this chain of dependent reality you see all knowledge missing. Dependent reality, because when I talk about dependent reality, you may think that, okay, now this, there is a fabric, then there is this, then there is this, and only finally there is all knowledge and all power. No. Finally there is all knowledge and all power, and all along there is nothing but knowledge and power. All along. All that is here is Om. Okay. The Upanishad starts with that statement. Whatever was in the past, in the present and in the future. Okay? Forms are organized in a manner that the very configuration, okay, that the atoms are moving all the time, the cells are changing all the time. Okay? The time within which all these different objects are behaving in a certain pattern is also changing all the time. So that means in this visual world, things are constantly changing. Okay? What was in the past is not now, and what is now is not in the future. Okay? But that past and present and future, you think past means 10 years ago. You think past means 100 years ago. But the past is, by the time I finish speaking this sentence, right, the first word has become past. Okay? And future we think is what? 10 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now. Actually, what? Next second is the future. So this so-called past, present and future is a continuum. The objects are constantly changing. The time and space within which the objects exist also keep on changing all the time. There is one reality upon which everything else depends, and that is Om. If you know that reality, right? If you think about forms, can you know all the forms that exist in the universe right now? It's impossible. Because by the time that I have finished speaking the sentence, the objects themselves have changed in that configuration. And there are so many unknowns. I can never know everything that is there in the universe. But once I know that no matter what that form is, it all has a dependent reality, and it depends upon this all knowledge and all power. It doesn't matter which next form that all knowledge and all power takes. It doesn't matter. Because whatever was there in the past, in the present and in the future will still be what? A combination of coming together because of the presence of this all knowledge and all power. So that means without knowing the detail of the world, you can still know the truth of the whole universe. It is like, where are the pots? I forgot. Okay, you have one pot of, imagine. Okay, now you have this particular cup which is made up of steel. Okay, now the steel, once you know that this cup is nothing but steel, okay, then you can add hundreds of cups, all different forms. If you pay attention to form, how many objects will be there? Infinite. But if you pay attention to the steel, how many objects are there? It's only one. Once you have understood that, then the steel can have not only a form of a cup, it will have a form of this jug as a plate in which you eat. It will have the vessels, it will have many different. And all these artistic people will create those in beautiful shapes. Right? All these very beautiful, nowadays you see steel in such pretty forms, right? That didn't exist before. So you have infinite possibilities with reference to changing of the forms in the future. Okay? And you also had so many different forms of the same steel in the past. You can't know all the different forms, but the saving grace is you need not know the forms if you know the content. If you know one thing, which is the steel, you as well know the entire world of steel with all different names and forms of steel which are known to you and unknown to you. So knowing of the final reality does not require for you to know the detail. Because if you're required to know the detail of everything, there is no human mind which can know the detail of everything. It is impossible. Okay? But without knowing the detail, you can know the truth of it. Okay? So this is what it says. Whatever happened in the past, I don't even know what happened in the past. I don't even know what will happen in the future. You have all these science fiction. What will be the world 50 years from now? And they have all these aliens coming from the earth and they are going to outer space and exploring. You don't know what, and people dressing very differently and looking very differently. In fact, 200 years ago, if they had seen what the society would be like, the society in which we are living, what? Nobody would have imagined that we'll all be addicted to our mobiles, right? And or constantly, with some gadget or the other. Nobody. It would seem like somebody coming and looking and, hey, what are all these people? You're with somebody and you're totally absorbed in your own world, in your own life. It's like all aliens or behaving like, childhood is knowing how to program, like as you said now, just change the setting. This is how their vision of the world is. Okay? So this is where even the present that we are living right now, 200 years ago, no human being would have predicted. Okay? Forms keep changing. The way they organize keep changing. But one reality upon which all these different combinations are possible does not change. And that can be known by you. And that is all. Okay? So whatever is in the past, in the present and in the future is nothing but Omkara. Okay? Then the thing is that if all these changing realities are Om, Ishvara, okay, then Ishvara would probably be the unhappiest person. Because imagine my pain is only my pain, but Ishvara or everybody's pain becomes Ishvara's pain. My suffering is only my suffering, but everybody's suffering will become Ishvara's suffering because now all that is here is Ishvara. Doesn't make sense. True, doesn't make sense. How? Again, look at the relationship between Satyam and Mithya. Okay? When the wood becomes table, okay? The table cannot exist without wood, but the wood, does it take on the attributes of table intrinsically? It never does. Right? Therefore, because it never does, right, I can use this wood to make something totally different. The table doesn't stick to it. Okay? The relationship between Mithya and Satyam is such that whatever are the attributes of Mithya, they don't stick to Satyam. This is why this Om, pervading everything, can be free from what? Whatever is going on at the level of Mithya. It never touches, is never touched. And this is what he says, whatever is remaining, Trikala Titam. Okay? That also is untouched by anything. And this is something, that Mithya is something that we can see very easily, even with reference to our own mind. Okay? These emotions that we feel, they are so real, they occupy us so much. Okay? But if you're a neurobiologist, okay, you will see that they are all just nothing but neurons which are ticking here and there, right, with all their chemical connections which are producing these emotions. Okay? So the emotions cannot exist without neurons, but neurons, can you say they have sadness? No. Right? The neurons themselves depend upon what? These atoms. Atoms have sadness? No. Without atoms, there cannot be neurons. Without neurons, there cannot be a feeling. But the feeling that you feel, what? Is not what? Is not the attribute of the neurons or of atoms. It's always in the chain of Mithya, each one upon which the previous Mithya is dependent. Okay. The latter Mithya, what? The previous Mithya always transcends the attributes of latter Mithya. Okay. What do I mean by that? That the fabric is never affected by the shape that it takes. Okay. Then the cotton equally is never affected by the thread that it becomes. So that means every Mithya at every level, whatever is more fundamental, right, it does not take on the attribute of the latter. Even within Mithya, if it is true, then what to talk of that final reality, which is Om, it never takes on the attribute of any characteristics of Mithya. So therefore, it is always free from the attributes of everything that is being experienced. Otherwise, by saying Ishvara pervades everything, you will make Ishvara the most miserable entity on this earth. Because if you look at the earth, there are so many, there are so many problems, and all the problems will stick to that reality. The reality is completely free. Now, how does one comprehend? Because it's difficult to understand that something being the truth of everything and at the same time is never affected by anything. We have one example. And that example is a very simple example. Simple example of our dreams. Okay? When we go to sleep at night, we create a dream world. We create dream time, dream space, dream characters. Okay? There is a mountain, there is a river, There is a, maybe if I think of France, there is a cafe, beautiful Champs-Élysées road. Yeah, I can create anything in my dream. And then I'm having a nice coffee, I'm having a great time, so I'm really happy. The whole experience, the feelings are going on. The world is going on, the interactions are going on, everything is happening. Has your awareness from where you have created the dream, while all these different plays are going on, has it undergone any intrinsic change? No. Because when you wake up, the entire dream world is totally, it doesn't stick to you, the Champs-Élysées doesn't stick to you anymore. Okay. While experiencing the whole thing, itself was always free. Okay. So then he says, Trikalatītam. Don't think that Ishvara is only these characters, right? That which gives rise to all these characters. From its own standpoint, it is always free. Okay. Being free, it manifests as all these different names and forms. Okay. So that is what he says, Tatapi Omkara. Okay. Now then you think that this Ishvara is pervading everything. Okay. Now, if Ishvara is pervading everything, where will you put your I? Because you have another entity called I. Okay. A wave thought that I am a wave, I am separate from being other wave, I am separate from being an ocean. Okay. Then you say, hey, the whole thing is nothing but ocean. Because the ocean is one entity which contains all the different waves of the past, present and future. If you count ocean, where are you? You have to find a place for I. If Ishvara is pervading everything, where are you? What is your relationship with that Ishvara? You need to ask that question. So the next verse of Upanishad, immediately it says, Sarvam etat Brahma ayam atma Brahma saha ayam atma chatushvat. Okay. So that means on one hand you can see all that is here is Ishvara, but the beauty of the vision of Upanishad is that it says that if you look at it from the other standpoint, all that is here is you. So that means that there is an equation between Ishvara and you. This is what Upanishad is. It is an equation between the I, the individual, and Ishvara. Okay. So here he says, if you think that all that is Ishvara, you will still miss out one entity, and that is Atma. Okay. So where will you put your I in that Ishvara? Okay. And he says, what is the truth of Ishvara also happens to be your truth. Okay. So here he says, Idam Sarvam, whatever is here, okay, Sarvam hi etat Brahma ayam Atma. Okay. All that is here, from one standpoint you can say that it is nothing but Omkar, which is Ishvara. From another standpoint you can say all that is here is nothing but Atma. Nothing but I. Okay? And therefore, there is that means you now need to understand if everything is here is Ishvara and equally everything is here is Atma, so then you have to know what is the relationship between Atma and Ishvara. Okay? So therefore, the whole teaching begins, and here it says, Ayam Atma Chatushvat. So now, the the job that Upanishad has to do, which is a very important job, is to make you see that this I is Ishvara. So there is a methodology. It takes you to discover how this I and Ishvara are not two separate, different entities. It is one. Okay? So when we see, it will take you step by step, okay, to discover this reality. So we will see that in the next class. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.